All right. Well, welcome to the first episode of the Yet to Be Named Jeff Delzell podcast. I'm still thinking through what that is, but just kind of want to give you a little bit of the lay of the land as to where we're going to go with this and my vision for it. So, um, this was something that I wanted to do to be able to go a little bit deeper. So when I'm on social media or things like that, you're oftentimes limited by attention span to, or even just the constraints of it to 60 or 90 seconds, or even the characters that I can put in the caption. And I oftentimes find myself having to really edit down what I'm trying to say to be able to fit the criteria that are there. And so I wanted a medium where I wouldn't necessarily have to be limited by some outside force for time or anything like that. And I could go deeper, both in terms of what it is that we're talking about. I think that this could be a really cool opportunity to dive into some depths of things when it comes to health and fitness that are more emotional or more just deeper pain points and things like that in my experiences and things of that nature. But also to be able to just dive deeper into topics that oftentimes are difficult to boil down into 60 or 90 seconds. So what we're going to do from a structure standpoint is there's going to be episodes like today, which are just me talking to the camera. And these are going to be a little bit of those expounding on some topics that you might have already heard me talk about on social media, or you might find there. Share some stories. It might just be I hop on because I want to share what it is that I'm thinking about on that day. These are going to be a little bit, these are not going to be scripted. I'm going to have ideas. I'm going to have things that I'm going to talk about, but this is going to be just going to be sharing what it is about a topic that I want to go through, make sure that I hit on some points. So I hope that they're valuable. These are going to be a little bit shorter. If it's just me, somewhere probably between 10 and 15, 20 minutes at the absolute most if I really get going on something. And then I'm also going to have on guests fairly regularly. So my next episode that I'm going to do is with another coach that I know. I'm going to have some other coaches from different backgrounds, different experiences that coach different types of people on here. And I also want to have on and have already chatted with having some current and past clients and potentially even non-clients, but people who are on a similar journey to hear their experiences and kind of talk to them through their experience of fitness and that sort of thing, but also maybe coach them a little bit on the call. So there's going to be a lot of these different things happening within the podcast, but I hope that each of them has a different piece of value for you as you're thinking about it. So where I want to start today, so that's kind of where we're going to go, and where I want to start today is really kind of the story of this podcast and where I'm at and how I think it parallels our fitness journeys, because I think there's a lot of things about fitness and health and weight loss and nutrition and all of these things that are unique in some ways, but also can be paralleled with a lot of other things in life. And one of my biggest things is this business that I'm creating right now, and have been building for years since I've become a trainer, has a lot of similar things that are happening. And so as I'm starting this podcast, right, I want to express to you a lot of the things that are not buttoned up. As you have already discovered, I do not have a name totally figured out yet. I have some thoughts and I'm going to continue to do it, but I'm recording this first episode without a name. I am thinking it through, but that's it. You can tell that I am using AirPods. I have no fancy microphone. I'm recording this on Zoom. I don't know if that's the best way to do it, but that is what I'm doing. And this is not ironed out by any stretch of the imagination. And if I had tried to compare myself to people who have been doing podcasts for a long period of time, right? There are a lot of big time podcasters out there who are doing it for a long time and the top ones. And I was trying to compete with is not even the right word, but just measure up to or look something like what the finished product is for them from the beginning, I wouldn't be starting. And I think that this is what we can do when it comes to our fitness and our nutrition and our health and all of these things, is we look at people who seemingly have it all together, in quotes, if you're just listening. They have it all together, and so we feel like we have to get it all together before we do it. I've had plenty of people who tell me that they need to get in shape before they can start going to the gym. And this is, I think, that mentality of I have to get my act together before I can go do anything, is what keeps us from making progress, because we can let the pursuit of perfection, or what we think it ought to look like, keep us from making the progress that we might have made along the way, because there are mistakes that are made even as we do it, but we learn from them and we get better at them. So even the people who've been podcasting for a long time, the biggest ones, like Joe Rogan, or even in this space, there's Huberman Lab, and my coach is Andrew Coach, who has one of the bigger ones, and Luca Oshibera. Like, there's a ton of these guys, even in my space, who've been doing this for a long time, Jordan Sayat, who are very, very good at it, but they've been doing it over the course of a lot of time. And if you probably went back and listened to their first couple episodes, they were probably as rudimentary, or maybe a little bit better, maybe a little bit worse, as mine is right now. But they didn't just know how to do it. They didn't just figure it out, and they're not better at it than me. They've probably just been doing it longer than me. I have friends in the industry who have hundreds of thousands of followers on social media, hundreds of thousands of followers on social media. And they have said to me multiple times, this is not necessarily an indicator that I'm a better coach than anybody else. It's just that I've been doing this longer and more consistently than somebody else. I, on the other hand, didn't like social media and still have trouble with it for a long time. I didn't really post anything for my business. And the trade-off from that is because I didn't like it, or because it was hard, or whatever it was, I left a lot of potential growth on social media, which is not necessarily the only indicator, but it's more people that I could reach and help and all these kinds of things on the table, because I didn't do it, even though I didn't know exactly how to do it, or well, right? I didn't feel like I was doing it well, so I just didn't do it at all. But if I had just kind of been consistent with it along the way, where might I have ended up? And a lot of these guys who are now super polished with their social media, or super polished with their podcasts, didn't start off that way, but they've been doing it long enough that they found a rhythm that worked for them. They found a pattern that works for them. They found a structure, or whatever it is, that works for them. And now they look a little bit more polished. But that didn't come overnight. Just like if you look at somebody in the gym who is in really great shape, and you look at them doing an exercise and you're like, wow, man, they really have it all together. Like, they really have great form, and they're lifting a ton of weight and all this kind of stuff. That person, when they first came into the gym, did not pick up that weight to start. They have been building toward that, oftentimes months, certainly a lot of people over the course of years or decades even, because they've been building slowly but surely over the course of that time. And we can get paralyzed by comparing ourselves to people who are further along than us, but it's not a ladder necessarily. They've just been doing it a little bit longer and a little bit more consistently, but it doesn't mean that you can't get to that point by doing that same thing. But the challenge is, oftentimes for us, is the starting, because we think that we need to do everything that they're doing, right? And it's a little bit like, a lot of this podcast, by the way, is going to be relating back to parenting, because most of my clients are parents. I'm a parent. If you've never met me, I probably should have done this at the beginning. This is another example. If you've never met me, my name is Jeff. I have 3 kids right now. I have a 2.5-year-old, and then coming up on year-old twins. They're 11 months and some change right now, a boy and a girl. So I have a 2.5-year-old boy, and then boy and girl twins. Levi's my oldest, Parker and Charlotte are my twins. And I think if we think about this as parents, we can embrace this reality a little bit, where if my daughter is really been climbing up on stuff and pulling herself along and walking along the couch and doing a lot of that sort of stuff right now, that is where her mode right now. But if she were to try to chase my 2-year-old around, she can never do it because she's not ready to do that. It's the whole, you got to walk before you can run sort of thing. You got to crawl before you can walk. And there's a lot of that work, that progression. And you would never expect a baby, even like when they were 6 months old or younger, to be walking around. You would just never expect them to do it because they're not ready for it yet. They haven't built the muscles and that sort of thing. So they have to do things in the right order. They have to do it appropriate for them where they are starting. And so I think the challenge for us when we're starting our fitness journey, or for me as I'm starting this podcast or anything like that, I'm not starting here thinking that I'm going to do this perfectly like they do it at the highest level of podcasting. People have been doing it for a long time. And I'm not going to try to even compare myself to that because it's only going to make me feel crappy about myself, right? Those people have years and sometimes decades of runway ahead of me. And so I need to start, as I'm starting on this podcast, with what's appropriate for me. And what's appropriate for me is I'm going to turn on my computer, I'm going to put in my headphones, and I'm just going to talk to the camera. And I'm going to see if I can figure out, I talked with a few people, I have an idea of how to put this on the internet, but we'll see if that actually works. And as I go, I'm sure that I will get more refined at this. I'm sure at some point I might get a microphone. I might get some things that make this sound a little bit better, and I might get a little bit more refined in all of these things. But the idea that I was going to go out and do all of these things before I've even started trying to see if I like it, to see if I have an interest in it, to see if anybody else has an interest in it, is a little bit foolish. Like if I record this episode and I do, 15 of them and all the feedback is, this is terrible, you should never do this again. I'm hopeful that that's not the case, but if it is, tell me so that I don't waste my time. Then, well, why would I go out and get this whole huge, perfectly set up thing when it's not quite working for me? Now, that doesn't mean that if I do this and I'm only getting 3 listens or downloads for each episode, and they're from my wife, my mom, and my mother-in-law, and that's it, who get it for a little bit, that I need to stop necessarily, because that's where we get into the folly, right? The person who's lifting a ton of weight didn't just stop when it got hard or when they didn't see a ton of progress right at the beginning. But you need to recognize at some point when you're on a path that's not working and redirect. It doesn't mean that you stop altogether, but you redirect onto a different path. So if I'm going down this path and I find that, hey, this isn't working, whatever it is, maybe nobody likes it when I just talk to the camera, maybe I'm not great at interviewing, maybe I'm not great at interviewing other coaches, or I can't get other coaches to come on, or whatever it is, then I might pivot from the direction that I'm going, or that I think that I'm going to go right now, because it doesn't fit or my lifestyle or for what this podcast is doing. So the results will tell me whether what I'm doing is going to work or go down that path or not go down that path, but it doesn't mean to stop. And so when we're thinking about starting, these are the key components. Is one, we don't want to compare ourselves to people who are really, really far down the road. We want to start with something that's an appropriate starting place for us. So when we're thinking about the gym, for instance, a lot of people make the mistake of, they look at the super ripped dude, and that dude's working out 5-6 times a week for an hour at a time, and they're eating like nutrition, they're eating meals out of Tupperware. Not that you ever need to get to that point, right? Like that bodybuilding type-esque stuff where you're getting paid to do that. And so we think that that's what we need to do. That's what the success looks like. That's what you need to do to be successful, or to look like that, or whatever. And in the same way that I could look at the Joe Rogan type podcast and be like, I should have a studio with a microphone and have my guests in person. And have it be videotaped from all different angles and all this kind of stuff. And you would look at me and be like, that's silly. Why would you ever do that right now? Well, it's the same idea as trying to compare yourself to somebody who's been doing it for a long, long time. So when you're starting out with your nutrition, you're starting out with your fitness, you want to start with something that is appropriate for your skill level. Going back to the analogy of my kids, right? You want to start with something that's an appropriate step for you. And oftentimes it's a lot less than you think that it is, because we're trying to build with a longevity mindset, in that the person who's in the gym who looks great and has been doing it oftentimes didn't just get there in 6 months. Maybe they did, but oftentimes it's been a couple of years or more that they've been at this and being consistent with it. So the key to success with really anything is not necessarily how quickly can you get there, but can you build it in such a way that you can keep doing it once you maybe arrive at whatever it is that your goal is? Because we can get so obsessed in this culture about like rapid, like I want this now. And that's the reason why I'm going here, is because we want the content super quickly, you know. It's our, how can I get the point across in 15 seconds, you know, versus being able to take the time to do it well and do it in a way that's sustainable and actually valuable. So when we're thinking about our fitness journey, our nutrition journey, I always say, and this is kind of my biggest, if I were to kind of hang my hat on one thing that I think would make the difference for so many people more than anything else, it's do less, but better. Do less, better. Pick one thing or two things that you're going to focus on and do them really, really, really well. And once you get good at them, then you can focus on, all right, I'm going to add more to it. So as I'm saying this, I'm thinking about, man, I feel like I'm doing maybe a little bit too much. So I'm going to start, even just as I'm doing this, I'm thinking out loud, I'm probably not going to go with client interviews for a little bit. I'm going to start with the two things, which are me talking to the camera and bringing some other coaches on. I'm going to try to get good at those, and before I do anything else. And there's a lot of other directions that I could go, absolutely, but I want to try to get better at those things. And I might even need to refine that even more. If I find that I'm doing both of them kind of mediocre, I might need to pick one and just try to do that very, very well. Because then once I can do that one thing, let's say that, for instance, with your nutrition, it's I want to eat more protein. And we can have a whole nother podcast about why eating protein is important. But let's just accept the fact for the moment that eating protein is important for your health, for your fitness, for if you want to lose weight, all of these things. It's a very important part of your nutrition. Okay. So let's just say that that's one thing you're going to do. Well, instead of I'm going to try to eat this amount of protein every day, it's literally I'm going to try to add protein, eat protein in each of my 3 main meals. That's all I'm going to try to do. Or I'm going to add a protein shake once a day to what I'm already doing. Or when it comes to your fitness, instead of saying I'm going to work out 5-6 days a week for an hour, it's like I'm going to try to do 2 workouts for 45 minutes, and I'm going to try to go for a walk every day for 20 minutes. Something along those lines, something that's a low barrier to entry that you can just turn on the camera, hit record, and talk. That's my low barrier to entry. There's nothing else that was required of me to make this podcast. There will be some other things on the back end, but that was it. And I can just start. And when I'm doing this, and as I'm doing this, I feel like I'm getting a phone call. So I probably should figure out how to turn that off during this. As you're doing these little things, then they'll become second nature, right? They'll become something that's easy for you to do. I have, done my 2 workouts a week and my 20-minute walk 5 to 7 days for 2-3 weeks. That's part of who I am now. It's part of my DNA. Now maybe I think about adding in one other thing. Maybe I add in another workout, or I stretch my walk from 20 minutes to 30 minutes, or anything like that can make the difference if you're moving slowly through that. Own the one point and keep going. But it doesn't have to be this perfect looking thing. Almost nobody who's even that perfect looking thing is actually doing it perfectly. But trying to compare yourself to where you think you want to be versus where you are, and getting things that are appropriate for you at your current state is the key to finding lasting success. And then once you are doing things that are appropriate for you, it's to stick with it and recognize that results don't come overnight. I am not going to upload this podcast and all of a sudden have 1 million downloads. It's just not going to happen. And so having realistic expectations for where I am and what I'm trying to do, and remembering why you're doing it. And that's a whole nother conversation, but remember why you're doing it. Because in the moments where it's difficult, in the moments where I don't feel like hopping on here and making content or anything like that, why am I doing it? Well, I want to help as many people as I can to be healthier. That's the main reason why I do this. And then the back end of it is certainly I want to grow my business, to provide for my family and all of these things. So those two things simultaneously are what drive me. So when I don't feel like it, that really doesn't matter, because there are people else outside, people like you, hopefully you are listening, who hopefully this will help. And then on my side of it, and doing this, and I'm not expecting that this is going to generate a bunch of clients for me by any stretch of the imagination, but it's something that even in the midst of the process of doing it, I feel like more confident to be a better coach. I think that there's a learning experience in doing this for me that I think can be helpful for my own business, in my own development as a coach and as a communicator and all of these things, which is super important. So if you're listening to this, know that I am with you. It's a little bit different what it is that maybe I'm focused on versus you. But what we're trying to do here is to take imperfect action. You've probably heard me say that before. Try not to compare yourself to people who are way further along than you, and do things that are appropriate for you. Have realistic expectations, do things that are appropriate for you, do them well, get better at them, own them. And then if you find that, hey, that's actually moving me in the direction that I want to go, then double down on them and do another thing. If you're like, hey, this isn't quite working, then maybe you make a slight pivot, but you got to give it enough time. The idea that after this episode, I'm never going to record another solo episode is silly. Even though this didn't go perfectly smoothly, you got to give things time to work. And it's usually not on the timeline that you have in mind. So I appreciate you listening. If you have made it all the way through this, I very much appreciate it. I don't even know what you can do to do this, but if you can leave a review or shoot me a message on social media or anything like that, it's Jeff Dalzell Fitness on Instagram, or just Jeff Dalzell, DALZELL on Facebook. If you just shoot me a message, let me know that you listened. That would be great. I'd love to hear from you. And I think that you can leave reviews. Again, I'm fairly clueless, and I'm sure I'm gonna learn a lot more about this, or share it with a friend that you think might be helpful for them. But really appreciate you listening, and there will be another episode coming your way later on. Talk to you soon.